informative. Sughra, talking about this gender segregation or separation between men and women, I know there have been some recent incidences where some mosques just don't have a separate space for women to actually go and pray, and it's been very unfortunate. How do you feel that the Islamic world in Britain is changing and developing to become more accommodating for women of faith?
Not an unusual question. Sad to say that, but hey, that's the world that we're living in. Lots of you will have come across various media news stories about segregation even in universities some months ago, or some weeks ago in fact. Mosques, specifically places of worship, I think have, for the British context, have come from a history. So, a British Muslim like me hasn't yet set up a mosque, and that mosque does not sort of, if it was to exist, it would look like, look as though it's a part of the British landscape, it would feel as though it was British, it would sound as though it was British, whatever that may mean, because Britain is a very sort of mixed society also. But one of the things that's been really difficult, I think, is the fact that the history of mosques goes back to being subcontinent or parts of the Arab world, because those people who set those institutions up in the 1950s and 60s actually were born in a different place and came here as first generations. So as far as they were concerned, they were setting up institutions that would take care of the spiritual aspect of their children's upbringing. And it was a very normal thing. They weren't very religious themselves, but it was something that they felt that they ought to protect now that they were living as minorities. Not an unusual scenario for any minority community. Today, we see those very same mosques. Many of them do have spaces for women. Most sadly don't. Of those that do, the spaces are not exactly equal. So you might find, if you go into some of the mosques, that the spaces are very small. Some mosques would even perhaps just store their broken furniture in that space, because it may not be used very often. And I think there are two things going on here. One is that we're not creating space for women, and therefore, by extension, to a degree, their children, because they usually are home with the kids and outside the mosque praying. So they're not creating the space. And secondly, when we do create the space, do they come? Do they attend? And I think mosque committees especially use that as an excuse to say, well, an extension is expensive if they're not going to come, or we really, and it's practical things like that that they talk about, or we really going to invest that kind of money. And what I would say to them is that when you've spent decades and decades, longer even, telling women that they're not welcome in this space, when you've spent decades and decades telling them that their prayer is better at home, which is a fallacy, then you need to spend decades and decades undoing that damage. You need to work on subsequent generations and ensure that they feel at ease in that space, that it's their home, that it belongs to them, and that they have a sense of ownership of it. You need to reflect that in the physical space, but you also need to reflect it in the makeup of your community, men and women working together, just as they are in wider society. And I think sometimes when we step into, from our normal world, wherever that might be, when we step into a place of worship, we kind of have this schizophrenic attitude where we're normal on the outside, and then we go into a mosque or a mandir or a synagogue, and we feel that we ought to behave differently. And I'd like to see mosques that encourage Muslims to feel a sense of normality, both within and beyond the mosque, that spirituality, that faith is a part of who you are, wherever you go, whether you're in a place of worship or not. So there is a real debate about the space of women and men in places of worship, in mosques, but I also feel that in the absence of the increase in space for women in mosques to equal levels of men, or thereabouts, that women and many men are creating alternative spaces. So they're beginning to use use other spaces outside of the mosque structure to have a space for prayer, for reflection, for worship, for contemplation, but also for activity, for coming together and doing things together for the sake of the wider society, for the sake of greater good, whatever it might be. And so when mosques don't give women that space, there are always alternatives.